Buenas tardes from beautiful Barrio Huanuca in Matagalpa, Nicaragua. Today's Memorial Day episode is in direct support of my fellow veterans and their surviving dependents. I dedicate this episode to you, your families, and loved ones. And I hope that if the episode doesn't provide your direct answers, it will at least help you generate the discussions needed to help ensure your final wishes are in fact followed. So, reminder and disclaimer, I am not an attorney. I do not practice law in the United States. I do not practice law in any other state. Military term. I will highly advise you have an attorney in each country that you have assets or reside in. I will also highly advise that you have a will, potentially a living will, again, for each country that you have assets and or domicile. The other disclaimer, I am no longer an accredited veteran service officer. I cannot file your claims on your behalf. I cannot charge fees for advice, nor can I advocate on your behalf in front of the judges for the VA benefits system. What I can provide is pro bono advice based on my career, which was quite successful as a veteran state service officer for the state of Florida. I will encourage you to seek out an accredited veteran service officer, preferably at the government level that has full access to your VA claims folder. And that way you can coordinate filings and can get progress reports on submissions of claims. More highly encouraged activities. I need you to gather your appropriate supporting documentation now. The longer you wait, the harder it is to compile data, especially when there is a need or urgency. Some documents may even have a time limit for expiration. This way you'll have a familiarity with the VA forms used. In addition, the versions of VA forms do get updated. So at least having the current version can be used as a template and again give you a little more familiarity. You can download the blank PDFs from the VA's website. I will make you aware there's a lot of websites that show that you can download a free PDF that's fillable, and then once you get to the end of it, it still wants to charge you money for it. The va.gov website will not charge you money for a generic PDF, but you won't be able to fill that one out online. You should also have a last will and testament. So, for your home in the U.S., for two reasons: prevention of U.S. estate being consumed by the probate court system, and to ensure your final arrangements for the country that you currently have residency in, as well as the U.S. Your will not be valid outside of the U.S. That second will needs to be written for the country you reside in because your U.S. will not be acknowledged outside of the U.S. So you are looking at some redundancy with two separate documents for last will and testament. If you still have any assets and or real properties in the U.S. living as an expat outside of the U.S. That will also then take care of the assets that you do have outside of the U.S. under the laws of the country that's your new host nation. Living wills, also known as a Advanced Directive. They vary per state in the U.S. Many nations do not have a comparable program available. The VA does have an Advanced Directive form. I'll discuss in one of the next portions coming up here. So if you have strong feelings of your final wishes, those can be completed in an Advanced Directive. I've had one for a number of years. This helps ensure that regardless of any other family members' opinions of what should happen in my last moments, I've ensured that there are legally documented requests that will be honored, and I don't have to worry about my wishes being honored. Now, the exact nature of all these potential VA forms, benefits, and filings abroad within the VA benefit system is pretty wild. So I'm going to focus on the most common supporting documents and the VA forms that are used. And after that, I'm going to give you an example of my own template. I have my total contingency plan of what happens if I die within the United States while visiting versus what happens if I die while living in Nicaragua. So Let's start with the supporting documents. The absolute most important supporting document to every veteran, and many of them wear it on a hat or shirt, is the DD-214. That is the Certificate of Discharge. Explicitly, we need the long form DD-214. There's a condensed version summarized. We need the longer one. The longer one will show the character of discharge, and there will be additional data of the qualifiers for that character of discharge. Most of the time, you're going to see honorable. If it does not list it as honorable, there can be some issues in getting VA benefits. Different topic for a different day, but your family members need a copy of the long form of the DD-214, and they're going to want to make a lot of copies for its use. It can be certified, it can be notarized. Neither of those are required for functional use, but if you have a service officer who's accredited that has the rare now today stamp that certifies and accredits the document, not notarized. If you have a service officer that can accredit that, it's nice. It's another level of verification, but it doesn't change the effectiveness of the form. Notarizing the DD-214 does not change its effectiveness of the form. But if you are dealing with final estate documentation and you have other documents being notarized, especially if it's going into use with a trust, then notary is nice, but again, not required. So DD-214 is your most important supporting document for all things veteran benefits. That gets used for employment, that gets used for healthcare, it gets used for a lot of things. So the second most important document for final remains and final wishes is the long form death certificate. In the U.S., there is a summary one that is most common, but it will not list the causations and or other contributing factors to a cause of death on that form. You need the long form death certificate. And again, I'm going to recommend making several copies. They're not cheap individually. They vary by price and states. So a lot of people will go ahead and order, say, like 4 or 5 copies, and each one may have cost them $10. It's a legal size piece of paper. As long as you have access to a copier that can print legal size paper, you can go get as many copies as you need, and the copies themselves do not have to be notarized for VA purposes. Maybe some other organization will require that. I can't speak to that. But the long form, the most important reason for that is it will list the 3 primary contributing factors, and in the event of trying to document a service-connected death for a veteran, one of their service-connected disabilities needs to be listed in there, and then there is an additional line that's kind of a Hail Mary line that lists other contributing factors. That can be very important because the veteran may not have died from one of their primary service-connected disabilities. They may have in fact died from a secondary condition to a primary, or in the event, for example, of toxic exposure, it may be something listed in the other contributing factors that the veteran was only rated at a 0% for. A 0% is still a win. It just doesn't, it means that at the time that the award was provided, the veteran's disability in that rating didn't warrant compensation. It was either considered mild, benign, or static, that it didn't impair their function or impact their ability to earn. But again, long form death certificate is of extreme importance. If you find contradictions, if you know enough information to be dangerous, and you find that the long form death certificate has errors in it, do not hesitate to go back to the issuing authority and contest the death certificate to get a proper one. We often, especially since the era of COVID, saw errors being created in long form death certificates. So remember, this isn't the VA, this is your local coroner's office. There was a lot of misinformation that organizations were getting paid to list COVID as a cause of death. I was a service officer during the entire COVID time. I saw two long-form death certificates that attributed COVID as a causation of death. The rest didn't even have it listed as contributing factor because the symptoms that COVID caused often were already secondaries on their own, like post-secondary infections, pneumonia, respiratory distress, things like that. So DD-214, long-form death certificate, both those in the long version. The other thing you're going to need to collect is your receipts for final expenses, such as the funeral home receipt, the cost of interment or cremation, transportation of remains to final disposition. You need to keep a copy of all of those receipts. And you do not have to be an immediate family member to be reimbursed for final expenses. If your name is on those receipts and you're the person paying for final arrangements of a veteran who is qualified for final expense compensation, anyone can be the person eligible to get that compensation return to a limit. So, if you had a $50,000 funeral, the VA is not going to write $50,000. And there are different amounts for benefit of whether it's considered a service-connected death or a non-service-connected death. And the non-service-connected death is a very, very small amount of money. Service officers don't often like to talk about it because at the time of distress, a lot of people find the amount insulting. At my time, I've been out of the job 2 years now. $300 doesn't pay for flowers anymore, and that was the non-service connected death burial expense reimbursement versus the $1,200 and things like that. So all your receipts, like everything else, document. Also, if you are the surviving spouse, you are going to need your marriage certificate and your birth certificate available. Now, if you're the surviving spouse, hopefully, if the veteran was service-connected disabled with the VA, they have already submitted that information and the VA already has it on file because there's a form called the VA 686C that allows service-connected disabled veterans to list their dependents on their award, and they get additional monthly compensation because they are the proverbial breadwinner in the eyes of the VA, and their disability is an impact to their ability to earn. Therefore, it's an impact on their ability to provide direct financial support to their family members. So again, a birth certificate and marriage certificate available, even if the VA already has you on the award on file. Yes, they can process without it if they already have it on file. However, it will slow down the total process, and VA claims processing has slowed down dramatically in the last few years, despite what you may hear in the news cycles. I'm 100% permanent and total. I still have active claims for various reasons, and I can tell you right now, when it comes time to the higher level reviews, the appeals and such, it is at a snail's crawl for completion. Luckily, there is not a congressperson out there that would ever want to hear about a delay in compensation to a surviving spouse. The VA's final arrangement side of benefits, the people providing the survivors' benefits, do work at a very quick pace. So, also, if there are dependent children as survivors still listing, you're going to need their birth certificates as well. Now, a surviving child is normally identified as a child receiving financial assistance or direct compensation, either living with the veteran or not, getting financial documentation, such as there was a divorce and there's still partial custody, or there's financial assistance to the child. If the child's under 18 years old, there are exceptions to the 18 if the child is enrolled in full-time school, college, or alternative up to a certain age, and or if the veteran's child has been deemed legally incapacitated. They're unable to provide for themselves. This may be a physical disability that prevents them from independent living. It may be a mental disability. It could be a developmental disability. If there has been a legal determination that that child of any age, they could be a 35-year-old child to the veteran, but if they have been legally identified as incapacitated and they have to have somebody as a curator to their finances, and then that child can still be listed as a surviving child and be in receipt of assistance thereafter for a service-connected death. You're going to also want to make photocopies of all the Social Security cards of survivors that are going to be eligible for compensation. If there have been multiple marriages on either or both sides of the aisle, the veteran, the surviving spouse, you need, and people go ape on this, you need a copy of every marriage certificate, both sides of the aisle. You need a copy of every divorce or dissolution of marriage on both sides of the aisle. Hopefully these are documents you've already compiled in the past, but you will need this because there are different laws for every state. There are federal laws, and then heaven forbid you're living in another country's laws, and the hierarchy of who has access to benefits varies. So you are now going by the VA's definition. They need to know that there aren't multiple people that qualify as a surviving spouse. So if you don't have those documents yet, now is a great time to get the feel good that it's done and over with. Compile the information, look in old records, because the longer you wait, digital records are no longer permanent. Organizations do end up dumping digital files just like they dumped the file cabinets of decades ago. Things used to go into a file cabinet. File cabinets went into file rooms. File rooms eventually went into warehouses, and then companies couldn't afford to pay the rent on warehouses to store paper. They went digital, but digital still takes space. Eventually, digital data gets purged. If you've had to look for old medical records, you find out quickly doctors' offices often purge digital records after 2 or 3 years. If you need private treatment records to support any claim, go on Tuesday when the places are open and start requesting digital copies of your medical records, because I'll guarantee you if you've waited 8 to 10 years to try to compile them, they're probably no longer available. And the longer you wait increases the likelihood that they will no longer be available. Compile your supporting documentation today so you never have to look for it again. Pro tip, decades of human resource and personnel management, I would highly encourage you maintain the paper copies if available. You want to scan them onto more than one hard drive. I would encourage having a small SD card or thumb drive with all those documents in the hands of whoever's the curator of your estate, curator of a trust, and or an additional thumb drive in a safety deposit box. In the event you have total loss of home, you need this stuff in a firebox. However, I'm from Florida. A firebox doesn't do anything about hurricanes. Your firebox may be out in the Gulf of Mexico. Yeah, I still say Mexico. It may be in the next county. It may never be found. So have redundant copies, digital in multiple sources to cover the spread that you don't lose all this information. We used to do thumb drives for homeless veterans. We put their birth certificate, social security number, their resumes, all of their documentation, if they had been incarcerated, anything, all of it all in one little thumb drive, so they'd be able to go to a library to access their data. We even gave them little bitty tiny waterproof airtight bags to store them in. And in today's world now, it's difficult to use a thumb drive in public access areas because of the potential of viruses and such. So yeah, all marital documentation both sides of the aisle. Now, I had mentioned earlier about the Advanced Directive or Living Will. The VA has a Living Will form. It is VA Form 10-0137. The title is VA Advanced Directive Durable Power of Attorney for Healthcare and Living Will. Form is used to ensure your final wishes at end of life are on file with the VA, identifies representatives, if any, you've elected to make decisions on your behalf if you are unable to communicate those wishes. You can have the form notarized by the VA, and that now it's already being put in your VA healthcare file. So if you actively use the VA for your primary healthcare, they have those advanced directive wishes on file. If you notarize it with the VA and you give it to your attorney to hear it or state into the trust information, now that information is available to the people who make final decisions after you pass. And also secure a copy of your last will and testament with it. Which brings me to the last will and testament, an essential part of this to ensure, again, that your estate doesn't wind up in the laws of probate court and the assets get chewed up by a legal system unnecessarily. A lot of us don't think about last will and testament. Many don't update them on a regular basis. Here in Nicaragua, everyone has an attorney. You use attorneys to review a lease, you use an attorney to buy property. They do an advanced title search. We don't use realtors for the most part. We use them to buy vehicles. There are many things. You use them for your residency, use them for a little bit of everything. So here, it's a little more commonplace to have a relationship, a continuous relationship with an attorney. In the States, it tends to be a little price prohibitive, and people don't think of attorneys until they're necessary. And I'm kind of politely trying to tell you now that you need a will. You can do a will without an attorney online and go get it notarized. I highly encourage you seek out an attorney in your state that knows the laws of where you reside to ensure your final last will and testament is honored to the ability that the law allows. So that's your supporting documents. And we're going to get into the VA forms. So this is where I live, breathe, and ate for decades, utilizing these forms. VA forms. So starting with the first one, your VA form VBA, as in Victor Bravo Alpha, -21-22. Appointment of Veteran Service Officer as claimant, veteran claimant representative. This is a very limited power of attorney. This power of attorney, and people freak out when I would say it, this power of attorney has nothing to do with your estate, with your assets, with your final wishes. This is a very focused, limited power of attorney that allows a service officer to submit documentation on your behalf. And much of this documentation is personally sensitive information, such as your medical records, your marital data, social security numbers, direct deposit information. That's why you're using an accredited service officer. There are still accredited service officers with many of the fraternal organizations like American Legion, VFW, DAV, but the list kind of stops there. And many of the service officers within those organizations do not have direct access to the VA's databases to look into your claims folders. Many, not all, county level service officers working within your state will have direct access to your VA claims folder, be able to submit in real time and validate that a document sent digitally was received. All of your state level veteran service officers we go through intensive training, multiple ID cards, multiple scan cards to get access. All of your state level service officers will have direct access to your VA benefits claims folder, will be able to review it in real time, be able to submit documentation in real time, whether it's by, almost all of it now is a direct file access system by submitting PDFs electronically. There is still a legacy process of submitting by way of fax machine to dedicated fax hotlines in the VA. I am not a fan of I did not like using the fax. Sometime our data systems were so slow, I had to go submit a couple hundred pages of medical records by fax because I couldn't submit the broadband with the email. But one of the reasons I would encourage a state service officer, if available, is they have direct access to your file. I will also tell you it doesn't matter what state they're in. They're overwhelmed with the workload. In Florida, we were the third largest state. We're the second largest veteran state, and we had less than 80 service officers for the total state that had access. One of the reasons I retired early is because I overworked in the job because I cared more than I'm supposed to provide support to my fellow veterans. So in today's world, I get to give pro bono information by way of this channel, by way of our WhatsApp group, by way of old contacts, by email. I even had one by snail mail when I was back in the States. So I can give guidance. I just can't file the claims anymore. I don't have direct access to the VA folder to tell you, yeah, the VA has that document in their hand at this moment. But the establishing the VSO, even if you're only visiting back in the States periodically, if you've established that VSO, because both of you have to sign it, there has to be a wet signature. If not, it's done digitally, and it's being done by the VA through an accredited organization like the American Legion, which my accreditations are under American Legion. So therefore, wherever I was in the U.S., there was a service organization that had access to my files. Wherever I was in the U.S., I could submit the claims under Legion. Technically speaking, if I'm a Tennessee citizen and I go into the Florida State Service Office, they have the option of either changing my Tennessee Department of Veterans Affairs accreditation to Florida Department of Veterans Affairs accreditation if I have an address there like a snowbird, or put it under a federally acknowledged one that's multi-statewide like American Legion. So a little backdrop on a good importance for why you should set up that VSO as a claimant representative. Even if you're filing the claims on your own electronically, even if you've got that skill, even if what you're submitting is simple, it's great to have already had that on file established in a local office, because guess what? When you pass, your surviving spouse or dependents are not the ones that have direct access to that digital system, do not know how to submit the documentation, will be at a time of grief, and will need somebody to walk them through the system. And that's what VSOs do. All right, off of that soapbox, the second VA form being used, VA form 21P, as in Papa, dash 530EZ. This is the application for burial allowance. The form is used to provide compensation for expenses due to final disposition, such as cremation, burial at land, burial at sea, and for medical school donation. So if there is a service-connectable death verified by the long form death certificate in DD 214, there is one value of money. If it is a non-service connected death, it has a smaller amount of money. I'm not going to go into the details of the money because the money changes with budgeting. Your third form, the VBA 21P-534EZ. They are easier than they used to be. These forms some of them were up to 14 pages. They're less than a third of that now. The 534EZ is the application for DIC, survivor's pension, and or accrued benefits. DIC is death and indemnity compensation. What does that mean? Service-connected death benefit for surviving spouse. So, as many of you are aware, when the veteran passes, any compensation they were getting from the VA. It ends with them. That is not the spouse's money. That was money brought in because they had a spouse. So there's like the extra $200 a month for being a service-connected disabled veteran. It's about $200 monthly. I don't advise telling your spouse that they're worth $200 a month to you. You might be filing new documents. But a lot of misunderstanding, because the veteran gets additional compensation for having a family or listed dependents. That is not the dependents' money. That is money the veteran got because they had dependents. And when the veteran expires, the monthly compensation for their disability expires. And now there are potentially different benefits for the survivors of that family. Service-connected disability, the DIC, death and indemnity compensation, provides a monthly compensation amount and provides some additional benefits such as educational benefits for surviving dependents, access to military bases for like commissary, PX privileges, things like that. So this form with the DIC, again, is for the service-connected disability. The other option, the survivor's pension. If the surviving dependents do not qualify under the DIC because the death was not deemed as service-connected disabled, and they demonstrate a financial need for assistance, there is a survivor's pension. This is the most complicated of all the processes for final arrangements because now the surviving spouse has to document the financial need. And that means listing all their expenses for them and or their dependent children, listing every single source of revenue, income, investments, property owned, all of it. They need to look at a total package to see if and how much in need the surviving dependent is. And when it's all said and done, it is not a lot of money. A lot of people question why they went through the effort to get this assistance. And quite simply, it's money you didn't have before. If it was only $500 a month, it's still $500 a month you didn't have before. So I highly encourage, by all means, pursue that. If it's not service-connected disabled and it looks cumbersome, if you win the pension, it's still more money than you had before. It's worth going through the effort of sitting down with a service officer and submitting a claim. Third part of that, accrued benefits. Let's say, for example, the veteran had a pending date of appeal, had pending claims that were submitted before they passed, and they died. Those claims will still go forward. The surviving spouse will be asked to come in, complete a new copy of the 2122 because the limited power of attorney the veteran had with the service officer expired with the veteran, and now the surviving spouse needs to submit the 2122 as a limited relationship with a service officer to submit their documents on their behalf, be able to review things in real time and tell them the status of claims. So, accrued benefits. Let's just use an example. He's a Vietnam-era veteran. He was fighting for over 30 years to contribute his health disorders due to the Agent Orange exposure and due to a series of bad medical opinions and claims and pension exams. The veteran's conditions were being denied for whatever legalities, even though most of the conditions that are related to Agent Orange exposure are already presumptive. Were you in country a day? Did you come up with one of these diagnoses? It's presumed to be connected, and it's a very simple process, but not everybody gets a good medical review. So let's say the veteran had been contesting for many years through the VA court system. The Veteran Board of Appeals maybe took it out of the Veteran Board of Appeals and sent it to the U.S. District Court of Appeals. And it went back and forth, back and forth. I've got a claim going on 7 years now that is going back to U.S. District Court of Appeals for the second time. Different topic for another day. But if you had accrued benefits that were pending and then awarded after you die, The surviving spouse may be eligible for all of the back pay or the one-time payment that was in question. If you fought something for 10 years and it started off as an extra $200 a month, and 10 years later that dollar amount comes into $600 a month due to COLA increases, all of that back pay may potentially be paid. There's also the month of death payment. So most know the compensation comes out on the first of the month. If the veteran dies at the beginning of the month, you need to quickly notify the VA of the veteran's death so they stop the VA compensation payments so you are not in a system of overpaid. And then the VA extracts money out of the financial account that the direct deposit was going into. So imagine if you're the surviving spouse and due to the trauma you're experiencing, you didn't notify the VA quickly. Veteran was at 100%, was getting about $4,000 a month. You waited too long to let them know of the veteran's passing, and now the VA is taking $4,000 out of your bank account while you are trying to coordinate final arrangements and settle things and going through trauma. So you need to provide the notification of death, even if it's just verbal, because not everybody gets the long form death certificates quickly. Sometimes they take a month, but you need to call the VA hotline. You need to tell the service officer. You need to make a formal announcement to the VA healthcare system. Veteran has passed. Tell them when, where, and how. Documentation is pending, so you are not in a system of overpayment. Okay, those are the big benefits. The DIC is a lot of money monthly. We're going to touch on that near the end of what that happens. It's not, in the States, it's not life-changing money, but overseas it can be life-changing money. The next form is going to be the VBA 27-2008. This is an application for a U.S. flag for burial purposes. Prime example, here on Memorial Day, you will see a lot of burial flags being utilized. So this form, along with the long form death certificate and a copy of the DD-214, can be submitted by anybody, does not have to be a direct family member. And you can submit it, I love this, this was always great trivia in the training for the job. You can submit this at any United States post office that stocks the flags. So you can inquire at any U.S. post office, or you can go on their website to determine which U.S. post offices stock the flags. But you could literally walk in with these 3 pieces of paper into a post office and receive a U.S. flag. You only get one per veteran. The other options is you can visit a VA regional office, or often you submit this form to your funeral director. They are very well versed on the duties and responsibilities to assist with veterans, and they're already going to have a copy of the death certificate, and you should have already provided them a copy of the DD-214. But that will get you one U.S. flag for the deceased veteran. The next form, VA Form 40-0247. This is the Presidential Memorial Certificate Request Form. So, but before there's chuckles in there. The form is used with the supporting documentation to request a now new unlimited number of certificates in thanks of a grateful nation, signed by the president sitting at the time of the veteran's demise. This is not a wet signature. This is an auto-generated signature. Imagine how many veterans die a day. There's no way that any sitting president would be able to sign every one of these themselves. So there's a caveat to this. In pretty much the last decade of changes in the political climate, it's the most atypical way I can say this. You may not be a fan of the president who was sitting at the time of your veteran's death and signed that document, or you didn't request a memorial certificate because of the president who was sitting at the time of the veteran's death. Now, in today's world, every time there's a new president, you could request a new signed copy auto-generated signed copy, unlimited number of auto-signed copies of a new memorial certificate to your personal like. Moving right along. The VA Form 40-0247. Oh, I said that twice. The commemorative. I got my numbers wrong. Haha. There is the VA form for a claim for commemorative urn or plaque for a veteran's cremains not interned. So, most people will know that they have an option to have a veteran buried in a VA federal cemetery. If you elected to have the veteran's cremation interned in a private cemetery, you can use, or interned in the home. You use this form and you'll either get a commemorative urn. This is a newer benefit of about the last 7-8 years, or get a plaque. So, prime example, if you did burial at sea, there is no urn. If you did total body donation, you cannot, like the burial at sea, you can get the plaque. But if you did an urn in either a private cemetery or you're doing the urn interned in a home, you can get a commemorative urn. You're going to need the standard documentation, the long form death certificate, this application form, and the DD-214. They will furnish that for you. So a VA 40-1330, a claim for standard government headstone or marker. The VA will furnish a burial headstone or marker for the grave of any eligible deceased veteran in a private or local government cemetery, regardless of whether or not the grave is marked with a privately purchased or permanently or durable headstone or marker. So if you are still a fan of traditional and you're looking at a full headstone, this is the way you do it. The form will ask you to explicitly write out what the inscription is going to be. And we've got one more on this list, the VA Form 40-133M, which is a claim for a government medallion for placement in a private cemetery. So, form used to request a medallion if the veteran is interned in a private cemetery and had a privately purchased and permanent marker. Now, a little side note, government headstones will not be shipped outside of the U.S. with the exception, unless it's going to a U.S. federal VA cemetery, such as over in Europe after World War II. Those are eligible for the headstones. Other than that, your headstones, for example, if I wanted a U.S. created headstone, it's not going to be shipped from the U.S. to Nicaragua. So putting that in perspective for you. Some other items of note. The VA monthly compensation the veteran receives, like I said, when the veteran expires, so does the compensation. If you're formerly married to a non-U.S. citizen and the veteran passes, the surviving spouse who does not have a Social Security number may still receive the benefits. You do this by contacting the Defense Manpower Data Center, the DMDC, 1-800-538-9552, to create a foreign ID in place of a Social Security number, also referred to as an ITIN. Now, hopefully, if you're married to a non-U.S. citizen, the veteran's married to a non-U.S. citizen, and they're already service-connected disabled, hopefully they've already done this because they've already added the spouse to their benefits compensation award. So, which again is the VA Form 686-C. You would again need the marriage, if it was, let's say, I'm a lifetime bachelor, but let's just say I was to get married to a local NICA here in a formal wedding, because informal ceremonies and civil unions are very common here. The formal weddings are less common here. But let's just say I was going to go down the rabbit hole and I was going to go tie the knot, and I'm getting married and I'm doing the formal marriage, and I have all intentions of submitting my newfound spouse, submitting her information to the VA and adding her to my compensation award. Yeah, for me, that's about an extra $200 a month. Again, we made that joke. But I would have already contacted and established her ITIN when I submitted my marriage certificate, which was locally notarized, translated into English, to add her to the award. But yes, you can be married to a non-U.S. citizen and they can still be eligible for compensation. Hopefully you take care of this piece ahead of time, because them trying to contact the local embassy in their country for the U.S. and do all this on their own is going to be very difficult. I want to switch over to some final arrangement information. Now that we've covered the basis for the supporting documentation, appropriate VA forms, I would like to show a little bit of the contingency list that I created for myself. Single, no dependents, veteran, living in Nicaragua. I have no real estate in the United States, only financial accounts. I visit the U.S. twice a year for about 3 weeks at a time. I see family. I take care of VA appointments. And there's a potential risk that my death someday in the future may actually occur on U.S. soil, even though I spend most of the year here in Nicaragua. So, because I live in two different places, I'm not globetrotting the rest of the world, I am most likely going to die in Nicaragua, but there is a potential to die in the U.S. Since I have financial assets in the U.S., which is my primary banking account and U.S. credit cards, I need to have a contingency if I die in both, either one, and I need to have documentation, different documentation available regardless of which one I die in and how it gets processed. So I'm going to give you the examples. If I were to die in the U.S., hopefully many years from now, I need a last will and testament created in Florida, which I need to update that since I've relocated a year ago. The second was my personal decision, a living will on file, which I have at the VA. I have that Advanced Directive file listed. Again, does not cost you anything. Gives you gives you examples like I don't want to maintain resuscitation. I don't want to, if I'm found brain dead, I don't want to be on artificial respiration. You can identify all those things. You can identify somebody to make decisions if you can't verbalize them for yourself, or say that you do not want anybody to be able to change your decisions. You can do all that with the living will. I have a small life insurance policy through one of my financial institutions, small amount of money. I have a sibling listed as the beneficiary for that. They have the information on that insurance form. They would need a copy of the long form death certificate and a copy of that insurance form to get that money. I mentioned earlier, total body donation. I elected for total body donation. For my personal beliefs, I don't have a necessity to be interned in the ground. I don't have a desire to be cremated and thrown to sea. I would much rather, for my own, I would much rather see my physical remains utilized for medical purposes. Now again, this is a personal endorsement. It's not a professional endorsement. My personal endorsement in Florida, I use Science Care of Florida. Science Care is registered in a number of states in the U.S. They assisted my family when my mother passed. That's how we discovered them. And I signed up for myself immediately. Total body donation. They will pick up the remains upon death. This is often coordinated before there's a hospice need, or you sign up while you're still relatively healthy. But upon passing, the family notifies Science Care of the passing. They will come out, they will collect the remains, you sign off, and in my situation, where I lived in Punta Gorda, Florida, for example, with my mother passing, they were out within like 2 hours. It was quick. Within 2 hours of her passing and us notifying them, they came out in the middle of the night with a hearse similar looking vehicle. Professional people came in uniforms. I signed a piece of paper. They collected my mother's remains. They put her in the back, and then the remains were interned at a funeral home overnight before it was transported to Miami, where they have an office, and then the remains are utilized for medical research. So it can be organ donation, if appropriate. It could be a cadaver for medical students. It could be portions of the remains utilized for scientific research. At that point, the family of the deceased has options. Would you like the remains of the remains back? Because obviously once they're done utilizing what they can of the remains, they have to do cremation. So you have the option. Would you like the remains of the remains returned to you or not? And in our situation, we said, no, we don't need the remains back. Her ashes were destroyed. And then they plant a tree in a national forest in memory, which was nice. This is zero cost. There is no cost to the cremation. It's a $0 cremation. You've helped advance science to some extent, and it doesn't cost you anything in a time of need. So this is what I sign up for myself. I'm already registered, I'm listed, and I have it listed on my VA Advanced Directive that Science Care of Florida will coordinate the collection and disposition of my remains. Total body donation is not available in Nicaragua, so I had to look for an alternative, and we'll get to that one here shortly. Dissolution of tangible assets in the United States. My instructions are, if I am still a bachelor and I die in the U.S., my siblings will receive whatever is available of tangible assets once any expenses are paid. And if I'm married here in Nicaragua, the wife gets it. They're just kind of common sense. Dissolution of tangible assets in Nicaragua. Similar. If I'm a bachelor here in Nicaragua and I die, my assets here in Nicaragua, nobody can afford to collect these things and then ship them to the United States to be dispositioned. So I have already coordinated. There will be a donation to the local school across the street. And if I was married, obviously my wife gets it. So documents I would need in this situation if I died in the U.S. The long form death certificate, a DD-214 long form, final expense receipts and who paid for it, marriage certificate if I'm married, or there is an alternative document in the VA, the VA form 21-4170, which is a statement of marital relationship. It's a totally other side subject, but it's worth looking at if you need to. Many people would already be familiar with the form due to various state laws. The VA form 21P-530EZ, the burial allowance form. So again, if I died in the States and I'm doing total body donation, the expenses weren't paid by the family, but you still fill out the form and there is still going to be money dispersed even though there wasn't an expense. The VA Form 21-2008, the application for the burial flag if I died in the States. Death certificate DD-214, family already knows to go to the main post office where I had verified for other veterans that the Punta Gorda post office in Florida does stock the flags. So they would go there and get a new flag. Application for the Presidential Memorial Certificate 40-0247. If family wants it, it's available, unlimited number. They can update it with every new president, whatever. And lastly on mine, the VA form 40-1330 UP is the claim for a commemorative urn or plaque, in my case a plaque, because total body donation there is no urn, for a veteran's cremains not interned. They need the form in the DD-214, and now there is a memorial plaque available for family to hang somewhere in lieu of an urn, in lieu of visiting a cemetery and such. Our local national cemetery for veterans from my town in Florida is about 55 miles to the north. I see less and less families driving significant distances to go visit cemeteries. I mean, there are, trust me, the cemeteries are still getting bigger. People are still being interned. More and more they're going to cremation, to be interned. But less people in total are doing regular visits to cemeteries. So in my mind, why waste the space when somebody else wants it? And I would rather just see it used for science purposes. So that's the all if I die in the U.S. So what happens if I die in Nicaragua? Well, I need a separate will created here in Nicaragua with my attorney, mi abogado, which has been started but needs to be updated. So again, I still have my own homework to do. That same little life insurance policy that I have with the financial institution, same thing, same family member is going to go through the same process and collect on $2,000. Dissolution of tangible assets in the U.S. Again, same thing. If I'm a bachelor at the time, money goes to siblings. If I'm married here in Nicaragua, the money goes to the wife. So that would be my checking accounts and such in the U.S. would get cleaned out and handed to the Nicaraguan spouse, which means that the money has to be transferred into a local Nicaraguan account. Dissolution of tangible assets here in Nicaragua if I die in Nicaragua. Again, if I die as a bachelor, donation goes to the local school. If I die married, the money goes to the wife. Total body donation in Nicaragua officially does not exist. However, I did some research and I found out you can do a total body donation in Nicaragua to UNAN in Managua, which is the main medical school. So we do not have an organ donor program available in Nicaragua at this time. I'm sure now that the largest hospital in Central America was opened in Leon last year, we will see an organ donor program in the future, but it's not available yet. So more than likely, my body would be used as a cadaver for doctors. And that's still advancing science. I mean, if I'm gone, I don't have a need for it. So I have to reach out to UNAN directly and coordinate with them my advanced wishes. And we're going to get to why I need to do that to the level I do. But the documents needed would be the long form, death certificate, the DD-214, final expenses, a marriage certificate if married, or the alternative form for the VA to still receive if I died here. The death certificate and the DD-214, the application for a burial allowance even if I die here, the application for the burial flag. Obviously, somebody here in Nicaragua is not getting the flag. Family in the States would. I'm assuming a surviving spouse here in Nicaragua should be able to go to the embassy, the U.S. Embassy, to facilitate getting a burial flag. They're not expressly listed in the VA's laws, pero it should be available. The certificates, I'm doubtful anybody here is really looking at a memorial certificate from the U.S., but it's available. The plaque, because I'm doing total body donation, is, however, the U.S. is not going to ship an urn or a plaque overseas unless the overseas address is to a U.S. federal veteran cemetery. So in that situation, if I wanted a spouse here in Nicaragua to have that plaque, I would have to have the plaque mailed to family in the U.S. and then have family in the U.S. mail the plaque to the surviving spouse. So it's still doable. If I die in Nicaragua and I'm married, I need to have already contacted Defense Manpower Data Center to create the ITIN. And the hard part of that is getting the veteran appointment of claimant representative VSO form wet signed with a spouse. That's going to be the hard one. That's going to be an effort with the embassy to make this happen, because unfortunately, unless they had the travel visa to go back to the States, which is ever more and more difficult for foreigners to do, they would need to come to the States to sign a piece of paper to go forward to get this. Now, I know that's a lot of data. We're at an hour. Trust me, I was a subject matter expert, to assist people at one of the lowest moments of their lives with a catastrophic loss in their life. and I'm throwing numbers and form numbers and required process and expected timelines at them, and many of them were still in shock. So it was my job as a service officer to try to create the situation where I could make this the seamless possible process for them, and potentially not only get compensation, but in many cases, if the veteran had been fighting with the VA for years for compensation, possible vindication. I helped many surviving spouse win awards. I had one that had been contesting multiple VA decisions for over 25 years, and her ultimate payout was in the middle of the six figures numbers. And honestly, I mean, she broke down in tears in the office when I told her about the final award after the veteran had been fighting this for almost 35 years. She honestly said, the money is irrelevant, just the vindication that her husband knew more than the VA would acknowledge, and that they finally acknowledged as a service-connectable death. So, yeah, it was a humbling job. I'm happy to have provided that assistance when I could. Some of the other considerations. You need to research your new country's policies, norms, and laws in regards to final remains. The example I gave in Nicaragua, here in the tropics, they don't embalm bodies. So the cost to ship a casket is enormous. You're not doing that by air. You're doing that by boat. It would have to be embalmed before it goes by boat. It's going to be a month on a boat. If you do it by plane, it's several $1,000s. I mean, my third-party shipper is $675 per pound. So a human being in a casket. You're talking ridiculous amounts of money that's not going to be reimbursed. So shipping a casket back to the U.S. is extensive. That would be for the very affluent people that the money really is no object. That's normally not the client that I worked with. But yeah, we don't embalm bodies here. So you tend to see funerals occur within 72 hours of the demise of the person. And you'll know there's one coming up because the vehicles with speakers on their mounted to the cars will drive up and down the roads announcing the death of locals. And then you'll see the funeral processions because people are on foot following a hearse up and down the streets of the city. So, interred remains in the cemetery is the most common form of local disposition here. Cremation does exist, but it's rare. And we don't have a formal living will advanced directive system in place in Nicaragua. So my advanced will in the U.S. applies that if I die in the U.S., I could make a statement and have it notarized with my local attorney expressing what my final wishes are, but it is not a legally binding document. So I'm hoping by the pre-authorization with UNAN's medical office in Managua for the medical school that that gets coordinated quickly, because again, they would need to pick me up, my remains, pretty much same day, next day, to be utilized effectively for medical research. And again, I already mentioned organ donation doesn't exist here yet. So, veterans who are permanently and totally rated 100%. If you have an effective date of the 100% permanent and total that is over 10 years old, and you have been lawfully married continuously for at least the last 8 years before you pass, your cause of death will be irrelevant to your surviving spouse. The VA will treat that cause of death as a service-connectable death, regardless of the causation. So I could have one service-connected disability, I could have 20 service-connected disabilities, but if I have a multitude of disabilities, I was rated at 100% permanent and total for over 10 years, my cause of death is irrelevant. It will be treated as a service-connectable death in regards to compensation for my surviving spouse. Now, that would be for any surviving spouse. The 8-year kicker is important because your surviving spouse didn't have to acknowledge the cause of death. That's fine because you were rated at 10%. But if they were married to you for the 8 years, there is an add-on kicker of compensation to the dependent and indemnity compensation claim that they would be filing for service-connectable death. And I'm going to give you, these are older numbers, but I'm going to give you the example. For example, in 2024, the DIC claim for a surviving spouse that was for a veteran that was 100% permanent total was $1,699.35 tax exempt monthly for the rest of the surviving spouse's life. Federal, if they were married to them for the 8 continuous years and the veteran was rated at 100% for over 10 years, there was an add-on of $360.85 a month. That means that the dependency and indemnity compensation claim, a tax-exempt dollar amount going to the surviving spouse every month, is $2,000 a month. Now, $2,000 a month in the U.S. is a noticeable amount of money. Can people live on it? Not in the States any longer. Does it offset costs? Absolutely. And I know I had a lot of spouses go, wait a minute, but he was bringing $4,000 a month in for his compensation. Now that he's gone, I only get $2,000. Well, again, the compensation the veteran was awarded was 4% or $4,000 at 100% because they were living with these disabilities. When the veteran expires, the veteran's compensation expires. But there is the service-connectable death benefit for a surviving spouse and the non-service-connected pension for a surviving spouse. And $2,000 a month in the U.S. would definitely help a surviving spouse with the money. But here in Nicaragua, $2,000 U.S. a month is life-changing money. So if I was to ever find somebody that I was going to tie the knot with, and it was going to be a dedicated relationship, I jokingly say they have to keep me around for the 10 years. I don't tell them the 8 years. I jokingly say they have to keep me around for 10 years happy. And that is life-changing money to a surviving spouse. Here, $24,000 U.S. a year with minimal hoops to jump through to get that money. But this is I know it's a lot of data. There's only a handful of forms to be involved with. There's a handful of supporting documents that may make it eligible. But these are the things that you should be thinking about with Memorial Day. We have Veterans Day for those who are still around. We have Memorial Day for those that can't be with us any longer. And eventually, we, the living veterans, will be the ones being honored on Memorial Day. So if you want to make things easy for your surviving family, take note, talk to an accredited service officer in the States, establish that 2122, update it if you haven't done it in a while. They do expire kind of sort of. The service organizations want you to update them like every 2 years. It's not required, but it's preferred. But you have a relationship to some extent with an accredited service officer, and bring the spouse. So the faces may change, but at least the offices normally don't. At least your surviving spouse will know a laundry list of documents they need to collect. Hopefully you've already done that on their behalf. You leave instructions for the spouse and or an attorney or curator of estate, and you minimize the additional burdens that they have to go through after they've lost you. That is the recap I have for Memorial Day. I hope all of you who have veterans that have passed in your family have been able to honor them in some manner. By all means, do the traditional picnic, dinner out, commemorate the veterans of your family who are lost while holding the ones that are still with you. I will have another video coming up pretty quickly on the music equipment. I've been bragging about that one for a while, been teasing on it. I do have some new equipment. I always have new equipment coming, but I have some newer equipment coming within the next week-ish. So in about 2 weeks, hopefully I have some impressive photos and video run-through of the multiple synthesizers that I've been collecting and compiling. But again, this Memorial Day, we're coming up on a little after 1 o'clock. I wish you all well, and until the next episode, adios.